Now on Consciousness Matters, we look at the tricky issue of academic discussion surrounding near-death experiences and reincarnation case studies.
What do you believe? What do you think happens when we die?
In reviewing 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation, the Journal of American Medical Association wrote, Stevenson has painstakingly and unemotionally collected a detailed series of cases in which the evidence for reincarnation is difficult to understand on other grounds.
So demands for evidence, I talked about this. So I'm gonna give you some examples of it. So you guys familiar with the logical fallacy, moving the goalpost? So no amount of evidence is ever enough because you just always ask for more.
So you spend your life eating food, the energy is available for you to maintain your body temperature. You also need energy to walk and to move. That's why you eat food.
You could reject entire categories of evidence.
It's one thing to have continuity of memory, that's bad enough. But to suggest that a wound of death can actually be transferred into the physical body of a subsequent personality, that drives my colleagues right up a wall.
The moment you die, what happens? You don't maintain the energy. Bury me, because you know why? I don't want the energy content of my body to just get radiated out into space.
Speaking as a scientist, I think that there is a problem with regards to the afterlife, and that is there's no proof that it exists.
But you're not conscious, and that's for eternity, right?
Yeah, there's no evidence that I have any consciousness of anything.
And what is fascinating from my perspective is they actually describe a sensation of separating from themselves and watching doctors and nurses working on them. They can hear things, they can recall all conversations, they can see everything, and they describe in clear detail what had happened. Which means it can't be a hallucination because they come back and tell us everything that we were doing. They're describing real events, not imaginary events. Doctors and nurses are like, I don't know how he told me this because he was dead.
Did you have consciousness before you were born?
Michael Newton was a hypnotherapist. His clients were beginning to describe the afterlife. And he didn't think this was possible.
No, there's just the state of non-existence.
But he followed his clients, a good therapist that he is, and he took hundreds of people into deep hypnotic regressions, and he kept detailed notes. He would ask questions about what was this, what was going on, what was it like, and what he found was...
What science says is that life, or consciousness, is not a substance like water or air. It is a process, like fire. When you put out the flame on a candle, the flame doesn't go anywhere, it simply stops. And that is what happens when we die.
And what he found was, regardless of what background people came from, whatever their cultural enculturation was, people were describing the same fundamental reality in the after-death state.
The brain is what we do our thinking with. The brain is going to rot. That's all there is to it.
In one case, this little child was brought back to the home of the previous personality, and the wife of the previous personality said, okay, if you're my husband, where did you put the will? We couldn't find the will.
Should reincarnation be a real thing, which I assume it isn't, since there's zero evidence for it?
We have now studied over 2,500 cases from around the world. They are easiest to find in cultures with a belief in reincarnation, but they have been found wherever anyone has looked for them.
The scientific position that the mind is what the brain does.
So most people in neuroscience subscribe to the materialist position. If you get enough of this stuff together in the right ways, running the right algorithms, mind emerges out of that.
The mind is a process of the brain itself. You would have to reject that in order to accept that the mind exists without the brain.
The little boy walked over to a floorboard in the kitchen, pulled up the floorboard, and pulled the will out of this little secret place that only he knew about, in the floor of the kitchen.
Well, how sure are we, how confident are we, as a scientific conclusion, which is what we're here to talk about, that the mind is essentially the brain? Well, we're very certain about that. We're as confident of that as we are of anything in science.
The problem is, none among us has an actual theory of how that happens. We don't even have something close.
What we don't have are any documented cases of mental activity occurring when there could not be brain activity.
So the question is, when are these experiences occurring? Are they occurring before your brain shut down, after your brain recovered, or somehow paradoxically during the time when your brain is not supposed to be functioning? And that's what patients have often reported to us.
Now, proponents will often say that, well, but the person remembers being, in the emergency room, or they have these memories that were forming while their brain wasn't functioning, but we don't know that. There is no case in which that's been documented.
And clearly, as you'll see here, there are very few survivors, and a small proportion of them had these so-called near-death experiences. But we did get 1 or 2 cases of people who were describing events from their cardiac arrest that appear to be corresponding with the period when the brain shuts down.
They easily could be forming their memories when they're coming out of their whatever state, whatever coma that they were in.
But we don't know scientifically how the human mind, thought, consciousness arises from brain activity. Traditional views have, of course, been that somehow brain activity leads to thoughts and consciousness and awareness, but we don't know how. Many have proposed that it might be some sort of neural network that's leading to this, but there's no evidence to support it.
The only reason to believe anything is true is that there's evidence.
Well, how sure are we, how confident are we as a scientific conclusion, which is what we're here to talk about, that the mind is essentially the brain? Well, we're very certain about that. We're as confident of that as we are of anything in science.
In other words, we can look at the whole brain, you can look at tracts in the brain, you can look at individual neurons. But the reality is, we have no science to explain how thoughts, consciousness, that real entity can arise from these activities, and how, if you were to connect a number of neurons together, you'd somehow lead to this amazing phenomenon.
I simply don't know about I don't know what I believe about death. And I don't think it's necessary to know in order to live as sanely and ethically and happily as possible. I don't think you don't get anything worth getting by pretending to know things.